Hello, my beautiful queens and my beautiful kings. Welcome back to the Simply Lili Podcast. Listen, I am so glad you're here today. I'll tell you, this is going to be an episode that I'm going to get really deep about certain things and something that really does need to be said. Uh, whether you're driving to work or you're folding your laundry, you're taking your evening walk or just sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, or maybe I always say this, you're just sitting in those last couple minutes before you turn off your car, and you sometimes like, oh, let me wait until this song is done. And you're just sitting there listening, and you're just taking those last couple of moments of peace before you go inside. Hey, I see you. Sometimes that parked car becomes the quietest room in your house, believe it or not. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with taking a few minutes for yourself. So whether you're listening from the car, from the porch, thank you for letting me spend a little time with you today. In this season of the Simply Lili podcast, we've been walking through this season together called No Permission Slips. And every week we've been peeling back another layer. We've talked about fear, we've talked about clarity, we talked about becoming the woman or the man that we're meant to be. We talked about letting go like old versions of ourselves that no longer serve us any purpose. And today, I want to talk about something that's simple, but if we're honest, it's probably one of the hardest things we do. And that is communication. Not talking. Most of us can talk, but communication, there's clearly a difference. And can I ask y'all something? Have you ever had an entire conversation with someone without ever really speaking to them? I mean, come on now. Tell me that I'm not the only one that has actually experienced this. I'm talking about the conversations that happen in your head. You already know what they're going to say. You've prepared your response. You've actually imagined their facial expressions. You've defended yourself. You won the argument. You've walked away dramatically, all before breakfast. Meanwhile, the other person has absolutely no idea they're part of this production. This is something that we literally orchestrate within ourselves because we are trying to process things, but we're not being productive. I mean, during this production, that other person, they're like literally living their best life. And you're over here directing a movie that only exists in your mind. Can y'all hear me? Don't tell me I'm the only one that's actually experienced this. And why do we do that? I mean, I literally wish I knew. Maybe, this is what I was coming up with, maybe because having these conversations feels risky, or maybe we're even afraid that we're going to hurt somebody's feelings, or maybe we're even afraid that they're going to misunderstand us, or maybe I think this is true for a lot of us. We're waiting. We're actually waiting for the perfect moment, or we're waiting for the perfect words, or waiting until they seem happier, or waiting until life slows down, or waiting until we're less emotional. And I've even thought about it. Sometimes we're even waiting until we're actually brave enough. And before we know it, weeks become months and months become years, and the conversation never happens. Can you hear me? Have you ever looked back and thought, if I had just said something sooner? I know I have. And not because I wanted conflict, because I never really enjoyed conflict. I'm a very vocal person, but I like to say what needs to get said. And if I'm wrong, I've learned to admit things, but then I also can take constructive criticism to a degree where if I'm wrong and I'm hurting you, I want you to tell me. Don't shut me off and don't delete me or, block me. Although those things weren't such a, how can I say it? It wasn't such a resolution years and years ago. We just never speak again. And I like my peace and I like laughter. I like when everybody's getting along. Is there anybody else can feel me here? But here's something life has been teaching me, and that's peace and silence are not the same thing. I'm going to say that again. Peace and silence are not the same thing. I used to think that keeping the peace just meant quiet. And whether it's culturally or whatever, that's what a lot of us are actually taught. We're not going to talk about this. What happens in this house stays in this house. And wipe your hands. I'm wiping my hands. And that's it. If I don't say anything, there won't be a problem. If I let it go, everything will be fine. If I just keep smiling, maybe it'll work itself out. And some of us grew up in environments like that where there's never been any resolution to anything. Life just kept lifing. I mean, sometimes it does work itself out, but sometimes silence doesn't solve the problem. Silence isn't always golden. It simply gives it, if I can be very honest, it simply gives it more time to grow. And that isn't interesting because we've been talking all season about permission slips, the permission to dream, the permission to change, the permission to start over, the permission to become. But if one of the biggest permission slips we're we're still waiting for is permission to simply say what's on our hearts, that is not rudely, not dramatically, not with the fireworks and the background music. Just honestly, maybe it's saying I was hurt. Maybe it's saying I need help. Maybe it's saying something like I can't commit right now. Or maybe it's saying I've changed my mind. Do you know how hard that one is? Especially for women. We make a decision, we commit, then life changes. Our priorities change, our energy changes. And instead of simply saying, you know what, I need to make a different decision, we exhaust ourselves trying to keep a promise that no longer fits the season we're in. And can I tell you something I've also been learning? Because when I speak from truth and I speak from experience because I know I'm no different and I am not perfect by any means. But what I've learned is growing doesn't mean becoming someone else. And that's something that I think is very miscalculated. And sometimes growing means giving yourself permission to be honest about who you are today, not where you were 5 years ago, not who, not who everyone expects you to be, but today. And I've often had conversations with one of my children, one of my daughters, and she said, Mom, my dad told me that when you were together, this, and that. And I said to her, what does that matter? It's who I am now and where I am now. Not that it was anything out of my character, but it's just things that are one-sided conversations that are misunderstood. But I no longer I no longer live in the live have well, let me rephrase that. I no longer allow for the past to live rent free in my head because there's one thing that I've learned is that you can't change the past. Now, can you relive it? Absolutely. If you allow yourself to, because you can't fix that. You can't even go back 10 minutes ago and fix it. one thing I truly believe is love your life and be grateful every day because remember, you can't repeat the same day twice. But let me move on. Let's talk about today. I think one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves is honesty. I'm not talking perfection. Uh-uh. This is something I had to literally learn in therapy, even though I was an adult and I had parents. But sometimes when you hear things in a different perspective from someone who doesn't know anything about you, sometimes it works. And no honesty, you get mixed results. Honesty is something where if you don't come to terms with things, you're always going to find yourself in the same situation. You know how they always say that when you say a lie, you got to keep covering that lie, and that lie has to keep covering, and that lie keeps covering. I've learned in my journey in the last couple years how important honesty is because I see how it affects your children, and it's just something that's like trickled down. And honesty is is such an important thing because honesty is actually where healing begins. And you know what else I've noticed? As I've gotten older, and yes, I'm getting closer to 60, I don't feel like I have to prove as much anymore. When I was younger, I thought I had to explain every decision. I wanted everybody to understand. I wanted everyone to agree. I wanted to make sure nobody was disappointed. And that was to make everyone understand I'm okay. I'm good. I was surviving. I was surviving. But now, child, let me tell you something. I've learned something else. People are allowed to be disappointed. And I'm allowed to make healthy decisions. Those two things can actually exist at the same time. That doesn't make me selfish. It makes me responsible. Responsible for my time, responsible for my peace, responsible for my commitments, and responsible for the life that God has entrusted to me. And speaking of responsibility, can we talk about accountability for a moment? You know, I had a great weekend, and the month of July has began for me with great things that have happened and also some disappointment. But I have to say this that the disappointment has literally taught me yet another lesson because I now see a lot of people for who they really are. And then as I was putting this episode together, when I say that, it's not me being judgmental. It's me seeing the things that I am working on, and that is honesty. It's a lot when there's just different, how can I say this? Different stories or different ways or different narratives, I should say, that people have. But if you put it all together and you look at it, the whole trajectory is not being honest, which is why we're still where we're at in certain areas of our lives. But let me get to the good part. My daughter got baptized and it was outside, it was in a creek, it was absolutely beautiful. It looked like something out of a movie, but it was an absolutely beautiful, beautiful baptism, not just for her, but the five other candidates who chose to accept Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior. But also, this was a very, very, very special service because my pastor, Gregory Edwards, and I'm going to give him a shout out. He, or Dr. Gregory Edwards, let me give him his credentials and his flowers. He was so specific about accountability, and the accountability was actually in conjunction to what he was speaking about, taking this incentive where you're going to get baptized and the meaning of baptism. And oh my God, he just put it in such a beautiful perspective. But during the service, he talked about accountability and communication. And that's actually what led me to create this episode because I think accountability has gotten a bad reputation. The moment we hear the word, we think someone is about to point a finger. We think we're in trouble or we think somebody's about to tell us everything we've done wrong. But that's not how I see it anymore. Accountability isn't actually punishment. I think accountability, it's freedom because when I'm willing to own my part, I have no longer, or should I say, I no longer have to carry the weight of pretending I don't have one. There's something incredibly freeing about saying, you know what? I could have handled that better. Not because you're beating yourself up, because you're growing. And there's a huge difference. Now, let me give y'all my disclaimer. Before anyone starts feeling uncomfortable, because that's not my purpose, now stay with me. I'm going somewhere with this because accountability is not about walking and pointing out everybody's mistakes. And this is what Spirit put upon me. We've all met those people. You know, there are many of us in our mid 50s who still don't get it, which is why there is still like no room in their growth era. And I mean, think about it. They're still doing the same thing, still convinced, because when we lie and we're not honest with ourselves or we don't hold ourselves accountable, we've actually convinced ourselves that we're good. You don't come out and you don't go any different with this. This is how it is, and you move on. You know the ones. They can spot your flaws from 3 zip codes away. We know those people. But somehow their own blind spots are on vacation. No, that's not the kind of accountability I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind that quietly asks, Lily, what part belongs to you? Not all of it, just your part. And can I tell you something? That question has saved me more than once of probably being very confrontational to something that I know that I had to think before I acted, but it kept me from being confrontational to something that I'm like, that doesn't even have nothing to do with me. Or why are you still worried about this when that don't no longer exist or it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago? Take accountability for what's your part because it's so easy to look around and think, well, if they hadn't said that, or if they just had communicated better, or if they would have shown up, if they had apologized, maybe all of that is true. Maybe all this is true. Or maybe they should have. But here's another question. This is the basis of all this. Now what? Because if I spend all my energy waiting for someone else to change, I end up putting my my own growth on hold. That's that's a long time to wait. I don't know about you, but I'm at a stage in my life where I don't want to waste time waiting for perfect circumstances. Life is too precious. Peace is too valuable. Joy is too important. And there are too many beautiful moments ahead of us to stay stuck in the same place because somebody else hasn't changed. Do y'all feel me? Now, I do want to say this. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying we ignore hurt. And I'm actually not also saying we pretend everything is okay. I'm definitely not saying we let people walk all over us either. Not at all. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is there's freedom in knowing the difference between what belongs to me and what belongs to someone else. Because sometimes we carry things we were never meant to carry and that we're still carrying. And sometimes, if we're really honest, we avoid carrying the things that are ours. Anybody else feel that? You know, this is what I've learned. Growth usually becomes with one very small sentence. I could have handled that differently. And that's it. Not, I'm the worst person ever. Not, oh my goodness, I ruined everything. Those are actually shame statements. There's a difference between between taking responsibility and tearing yourself apart. One helps you grow and the other keeps you stuck. And friend, let me tell you something. We've all had those moments. I mean, I know I have. Moments where I replayed a conversation on the drive home. Have you ever done that? Like, it's like something happens and you're driving and it's just like you replay it. And it's like, I shouldn't have said that, I should have said that. Or why did this even take place? And then you're halfway home and then suddenly you're replaying every single word. Like, why did I say that? Or I should have said this instead. Or that would have been so much better. Funny how we always think of the perfect response 20 minutes later, never in the moment, never. Life doesn't work that way. And maybe that's okay because maybe communication isn't about having the perfect words. Maybe it's about having an honest heart. One of the things I've noticed over the years is that people don't usually expect perfection from us. They expect honesty. And there's a difference there. Think about think about the relationships in your life that mean the most to you. Your closest friend, whether it's a sister, a daughter, a son, someone you can call and say, "Can you tell me something?" Or "Can I tell you something?" Those relationships didn't become strong because nobody ever made mistakes. They became strong because somebody was willing to say, "I'm sorry," or "I misunderstood," or "Help me understand," or "Let's talk." Those four little words. I mean, let's talk. They've saved a lot of relationships and they probably prevented a lot of unnecessary heartache too. But that's not always the story. If the other party isn't honest and holds on to the past and holds on to minimal facts, that is a whole different result that you're going to get. You know what usually gets us into trouble? Assumptions. We become we become detectives and we keep digging and digging and digging. But sometimes we're digging for nothing. We end up in this rabbit hole that there's nothing there. We notice something we noticed somebody was a little quieter than usual. Let me say that. And immediately our mind goes to work. Did I do something or are they upset? Did did they mean that text? Or or the big things when we try to hear things when we see things in a text, why'd they use a period? And oh yes, can we please talk about punctuation for just a second? Since when did a period become so offensive? Some of us can read an entire personality into one text message. Meanwhile, the other person was standing in line at the grocery store trying to answer before they forgot. See how easy it is to create stories in our minds. This is what I'm trying to say. Stories that aren't even true. That's what That's why communication matters so much, because assumptions fill the space where conversations should have happened. I've had moments where I finally asked someone about something I've been carrying around for weeks, only to discover they had no idea, like none. I spent days trying to figure it out. They weren't even thinking about it. And I laughed because I realized how much energy I invested in a story that only existed in my own imagination. I don't know, but I have a feeling maybe you've been there too. And if you have, welcome to the club, because you know what? We're all human. But here's the beautiful thing, we can choose differently. We can decide that this season we're going to we're going to ask instead of assume. We're going to clarify instead of criticize. We're going to communicate instead of collecting quiet resentment, because resentment has a funny way of growing in silence. It starts out small, almost unnoticed. But if we never really deal with it, let me tell you something, it gets louder. And one day we're upset about something that didn't even happen yesterday. It's been building for months, sometimes years. And that's why I've learned and now believe communication is one of the greatest acts of kindness we can offer another person. Boom, I did say that. Some won't. Not because everyone will agree with us, because some won't, but because healthy relationships deserve honesty. And healthy communication says, listen, I respect you enough to tell you the truth. What do you have to lose at this point? I mean, seriously. And if I can say more, it also says, I respect myself enough to speak it with kindness. There's wisdom in that. And there's also peace in that. And you know, what's really, really beautiful? When you stop waiting for the perfect moment. When we work on ourselves and start creating healthier relationships. But let me clear that. Sometimes, no matter how much we change, some are set in their ways. And so there is no fixing or compromising to make things better. Not perfect relationships is what we're working at, healthier ones, because healthy people talk. I'm going to say that again because that's what I've learned. Healthy people talk. They ask questions, they listen, they apologize, they forgive, they grow. And friend, I mean, we can do the same thing. You know, what else I've been thinking about lately? Communication isn't just about what we say. It's also about what we don't say. Sometimes the words we keep inside end up speaking louder than the words we actually say. I mean, think about it. How many times have you smiled while carrying something you wish someone would have asked about or answered? I'm okay. When the truth was, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, I'm disappointed, or I'm trying. Ladies and gentlemen, we have become professionals at saying, I'm fine. I sometimes I think "I'm fine" should win an award and be literally in its own category, because depending on the day, those 2 little words can mean about 15 different things. I'm fine. Translation, I'm hungry. I'm exhausted. I've had enough. Or I need a hug. I'd really like somebody else to decide what's for dinner. Anybody with me here? Are y'all following me? I'm speaking truth today. This service on Sunday really, really put a lot into my heart, and it just had me thinking. And it's just something where I wanted to bring this to the table because I actually go through things like this in my own life. And it's like the avoidance of when you're trying to make things right, but the other person or other people aren't there yet. Somewhere along the way, like I was saying, we actually convince ourselves that being strong means carrying everything quietly. But something there's something else that I learned, strength isn't pretending nothing bothers you. Strength is knowing when to say, listen, I need to talk. I think that is one of the bravest sentences we can ever speak. Not because we all have the answers, because that's not what I'm saying. But then again, I hate to flip things into a negative perspective, but there's times when you do make that approach to people and they're like, I'm not even trying to talk about it. Or, you know how she is, you know how he is. And things become, they relive and they resurface, but then they remain stagnant. What is it that we really do at this point? Because we're willing to let someone into conversation doesn't always mean that you're going to be heard. I used to think vulnerability actually meant weakness. I really did. I thought if I admitted that I was struggling, that people would literally think less of me. Now, I see it differently. Some of the strongest women I've ever met are the ones who aren't afraid to say, listen, I don't have it all together today. There's something refreshing about people who are real. Not blunt, but real. Not perfect, but real. And isn't that what we're all looking for, anyways? Not another perfect picture, not another polished social media post, just someone who says, me too. Yeah, Lil, me too. I think that's one of the reasons I love doing this podcast so much because every week we get to show up as ourselves. There's no filters, there's no pretending. I know I keep it real, y'all. Just women. And I'm starting to get an audience with men walking through life together. Some days we're celebrating, some days we're healing, some days we're laughing at ourselves saying, what the heck did I do that for? And some days we're learning. And I hope you know that that's enough. You don't have to arrive before you belong here. I'm going to say that again. You don't have to arrive before you belong here. You're welcome just as you are. You know what this conversation reminds me of? There's a verse that has stayed with me for a long time, and it is Proverbs 15, verse 1. Because y'all know I love the book of Proverbs. It says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. I love that. Not because it tells us to avoid hard conversations. It doesn't. It it tells us how to have them. Did you notice that? It doesn't say don't speak. It doesn't say keep the peace by staying quiet. It says a gentle answer. That means we can tell the truth without tearing someone down. We can set boundaries without becoming bitter. We can disagree without becoming disrespectful. You know what that's called, y'all? Maturity. And let me tell you something. That took me that took me years to learn. Being sassy and being confrontational, that was tearing me down more than it was building me up. And I was also tearing other people down. And after years of learning about forgiveness and learning about letting go, and then coming into learning scripture and applying scripture to my life, I am now in a place where I can say, yes, I get it. Took years. Sometimes I thought if I didn't say anything, I was being the bigger person. Or other times, and there were times I waited so long to say something that by the time I finally spoke, and there were just actually times where I spoke too much. I wasn't gentle anymore. Anybody else feel like that? Or anybody else been there? And I had to I had let the frustration build within me. I had rehearsed the conversation 100 times. I had collected evidence. I had written the speech in my head, how I'm going to approach this. By then, I wasn't responding. I was unloading. And those are two different things. I've learned that it's much healthier to have one honest conversation than 10 imaginary ones. Can I say that again? I've learned that it's so much healthier to have one honest conversation than 10 imaginary ones. The mind is a very, very strong thing. Now, on a positive note, it's actually healthier to have at least one conversation, like I'm saying, because imaginary conversations usually end up with us winning because it's a one sided conversation. Real conversations end up with understanding, or at least they give us understanding a chance. Now, does that mean every conversation works out perfectly? No, of course not. Sometimes people still misunderstand us, and men always misunderstand us. Sometimes they disagree. Sometimes they aren't ready to hear what we have to say. And you know what? That's okay. I've learned that. And because here's the beautiful part, our responsibility isn't to control someone else's response, because that's what sometimes we look for. We are expecting for them to say what we want them to say. Our responsibility is to communicate with honesty and kindness. Kindness is such a huge act, and I've learned that as well. See, that's where our peace is going to come from, knowing we showed up with a good heart, not a perfect speech or not cussing somebody out or confrontation and wanting to get the last word, just a good heart. I've been thinking a lot about boundaries too for the longest time. I always thought boundaries for some reason push people away. But I've realized something. Healthy boundaries don't push healthy people away. They actually make relationships stronger because boundaries, believe it or not, they actually create clarity. They remove the guessing, they remove the resentment. They help people know how to love us well. And they remind us how to love others well too. Sometimes a boundary sounds like, I can't make it this time. And sometimes it sounds like, I actually need a little more notice. Sometimes I love you, but I can't fix this for you. Ooh, thank you, Spirit. And that's hard. Sometimes people can't go there. And you know what? They just write us off. And they just say, that's why I don't bother with you. That's why I don't say nothing to you. But why is it that you really feel that way? Could it be because when you want what you want to unload is something that's in your mind, again, that's living rent free, that you have already created a narrative that you're expecting a result that no one is expecting because you're not saying nothing. It's still in your head. So, this sometimes can be very hard, especially if you're a nurturer or especially if you're the one that everyone calls and you want to help, you want to rescue, you want to make everything okay. But sometimes the most loving thing that we can actually do is let someone grow through what they're facing. Support them? Absolutely. Pray for them? Always. Walk beside them? Of course. Or maybe not. Carry it all for them? Not always, because you know what? That's not love. Sometimes that's exhaustion, actually wearing a smile. And if we're honest, some of us have been carrying responsibilities that were never ours to begin with. And I'm saying that again. No wonder we're tired. No wonder we're overwhelmed. Maybe this season isn't about doing more. Maybe it's about communicating better. Maybe it's about saying, I'd love to help, but listen, I can't this week without feeling guilty. Maybe it's about asking for help without apologizing first. Or maybe it's about calling someone you've been meaning to call, not because everything is wrong, but because relationships are worth tending to before they're in trouble. I think we underestimate the power of a simple conversation. Sometimes healing begins with two words. Can we? Can we talk? Can we pray? Can we start over? Can we clear the air? Can we be honest? Those little words. They've rescued relationships. They've rescued friendships. They've actually restored families. They've strengthened marriages. And sometimes they've actually brought peace in our hearts. But then there's some that aren't just ready for that because they're still bitter and they're still angry about something that sometimes you don't even have something to do with. And that's something that they actually have to work out on their own. You know, I keep coming back to one thought, and that is that, and this is how I think about now in my life. Life moves so quickly and it's going so quickly. It really does. One minute we're making summer plans, and the next thing you know, we're asking ourselves, like, where the year went. And somewhere in the middle of all that living, it's easy to let conversations pile up. The phone call we were putting off, the friend we've been meaning to check on, the apology we know we need to give, the boundary we've rehearsed 100 times, but still haven't spoken, or maybe the conversation we've been avoiding is the one we need to have with ourselves. I'm going to say that again. Maybe the conversation that we've been avoiding is the one that we literally need to have with ourselves. And can I ask you something? When was the last time you sat quietly without your phone, without the television, without the to do list, without putting everything in your life in social media like it's all glorified and it's all perfect? And you've actually asked yourself, how am I? Like, really, how am I? Not housework, not did I get everything done or not? Everything else, did everybody else have what they needed? How are you? Sometimes we're so busy taking care of everyone around us that we don't even realize we stopped checking in on ourselves. And if that sounds familiar, I just want you to know that you're not alone in this. Because let me tell you something, I've been there too. There have been seasons where I was so focused on showing up for everyone else that I forgot I needed a little care too. Not because I didn't know better, because life life gets busy. I mean, if I keep it real, responsibilities don't send us a calendar invitation. They just keep showing up. Laundry, bills, appointments, family, work, emails, grocery, and somehow we convince ourselves, I'll get to me later. But later has a funny way of turning into months, then years, then one day we wonder why we're so exhausted. And can I tell you something else that I've learned? Real isn't a reward for finishing everything. Because if we're waiting to finish everything, you're never, you're never going to rest. There's always another load of laundry. There's always another email. There's always another responsibility because life keeps moving. So somewhere along the way, we have to give ourselves permission to pause. Not because we're lazy, but because we're human. And I think that's true about communication too. Healthy communications doesn't begin when everything is perfect. It begins when we're willing to be present, when we're willing to learn to slow down, to put the phone face down for a little while, and to really hear someone. You know what's interesting? Some of the best conversations I've ever had weren't planned. They happened while doing dishes, sitting on the porch, or driving in the car, or just literally like walking through a store. Life has a way of creating little windows. And the question is, are we paying attention? Because sometimes someone isn't looking for us to solve their problem. And I've also learned they're looking for us to hear their heart. And there's a difference. And if you're the fixer, like so many of us are, that's that's not always easy. We hear a problem and immediately we're ready with three solutions, two phone numbers and a YouTube video. Meanwhile, you're thinking, could you just listen for a minute? I've had to learn that too. Sometimes love listens before it speaks. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone isn't advice. It's literally our attention. And I think that's true with God too. Some of my sweetest moments of prayer haven't been filled with words. They've just been filled with quiet, just sitting, just breathing, and just listening, trusting that He has already placed things in my heart and knows what my heart is trying to say. And maybe that's an invitation for us this week to listen a little more, to assume a little less, to speak a little kinder, to own our part without carrying everyone else's. And to remember that accountability isn't punishment, it's actually growth. Communication isn't about winning, it's about connecting. And boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with healthy hinges. They're open and they can be closed. They protect what matters. And as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one question, just one question. What's one conversation you've been avoiding? Not 10, just one. Maybe it's a conversation with your spouse, maybe it's your daughter, maybe your son, maybe your sister, maybe your best friend, maybe your boss, I don't know, maybe even your doctor or maybe even your financial planner, I don't know. Maybe you've been avoiding that one too. Or maybe the conversation is with women looking back at you in the mirror. The woman who's been carrying guilt that doesn't belong to her. The woman or man who's been waiting for permission to speak up. The woman who's been shrinking herself to make everyone else comfortable. Did y'all hear that? My queens and kings, if that's you, hear me when I say this. You don't need permission to be honest. You don't need permission to ask for help. You don't need permission to set a healthy boundary. You don't need permission to say, I can't do that right now. You don't need permission to change your mind. And you certainly don't need permission to become the woman or man God is gently shaping you to be. One honest conversation can just change so much. Not because it fixes everything overnight, because, but honestly, honesty opens the door to healing. And healing, well, healing has a way of changing everything else. So I wanted to use the right words. Oh, I can use this word. Here's my little challenge for you this week. Not homework, just an invitation. Have one conversation. One. Maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's longer, maybe it's simply sending a text that says, hey, can we talk? You don't have to solve every problem. You don't have to have every answer. You just have to be willing to begin. And maybe, just maybe, that conversation you've been avoiding will become the very conversation that brings you peace. But also keep in mind that if you've been trying and trying, and that other person isn't responding, that's because they're not ready. And you have to respect that boundary. So listen, y'all, before we go, I want to thank you. Thank you for inviting me into your lives each week. Because Simply Lili Podcast is doing really well and it's moving on. And God just keeps blessing me with things to say and things to talk about. And I love to keep it real. I like, to have real talk, real conversation with real faith. I want to thank you for sharing these conversations with your sisters, your daughters, your friends, even your coworkers. Every message you send, every review you leave, every time you tell someone you should listen to Simply Lili, You remind me why this podcast actually matters, and I say that from my heart. We're building more than a podcast. What we're building here is actually a community, a place where women and men can laugh, grow, heal, and actually remind each other that none of us are walking this journey alone. And I respect that more than you'll ever know. So until next week, y'all, be kind to yourself. Give yourself grace when you're still learning. Speak with honesty. Listen with love. And don't be afraid to have the conversations that matter, because beautiful things happen when we stop waiting for permission and start living with intention. This is Simply Lili, and I'm so grateful we had this conversation today. I'll meet you right back here next week. Take care of yourselves, and remember, no permission slips. Bye, my beautiful queens and kings, and I'll talk to y'all next week.